Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another session of Popular Music Books in Process, which is a collaboration between the Journal of Popular Music Studies, IASPM US, and the Pop Conference. My name is Gus Stadler, and I co-organize the series along with Elena Razlogova, Alex Visi, Eric Weisbard, Carl Wilson, and Kimberly Mack. Um, sorry, I'm a little lost here. So today we have a session on one of the most interesting and important performers of our time, Bad Bunny. Um, this is in light of imminently a book that's going to be released imminently called. So I should have asked you also. Do I say P fucking R? Is that just, or is there some other way of
That's how
pronouncing?
we say it.
All right,
P
awesome.
fucking
It's fun to
R. P
say.
fucking
P fucking
Uh,
N.
so P fucking R, spelled like the kids would spell it. How Bad Bunny became the global voice of Puerto Rican resistance, and it's coming from Duke on January 27th, as well as a Spanish version that comes out with Planeta on the same day. Um, so, offering a portrait of the past and future of Puerto Rican resistance through one of its loudest and proudest voices, the book draws on interviews with musicians, politicians, and journalists, as well as ethnographic research to set Bad Bunny and Puerto Rican resistance in a historical, political, and cultural context. Authors Vanessa Díaz and Petra Rivera-Rideau, creators of the Bad Bunny Syllabus, which is really a great resource, demonstrate Bad Bunny's place in a long tradition of infusing joy and protest into music, and honor the many evolving forms of daily resistance to oppression and colonialism that are part of Puerto Rican life. And I'll give brief bios for each of the participants. Vanessa Díaz is associate professor of Chicana O and Latina O studies at Loyola Marymount University. She's a multimedia ethnographer and journalist whose work focuses on issues of race, gender, and labor in popular country across the Americas. Vanessa's author of the book Manufacturing Celebrity, Latino Paparazzi and Women Reporters in Hollywood from Duke in 2020, and director of the bilingual documentary film Cuban Hip Hop Desde el Principio, and she's written for such outlets as The Washington Post, USA Today, Latina, Rolling Stone, and People magazine. Petra Rivera-Rideau is Associate Professor and Chair of American Studies at Wellesley College. Petra's research explores race, popular music, Puerto Rico, and Latinx identities. She's the author of Remixing Reggaeton, The Cultural Politics of Race in Puerto Rico, and Fitness Fiesta, Selling Latinx Culture Through Zumba, both with Duke. She's co-editor of Afro Latinas in Movement, Critical Approaches to Blackness and Transnationalism in the Americas. She's also written for popular media outlets like LA Times, Washington Post, and Latina. She's served as a consultant on several reggaeton projects, including Bad Bunny's 2023 Coachella headlining set. So Professors Diaz and Rivera-Rideau will be in conversation with Anamaria Sayre. Ms. Sayre is a podcast, radio, and video host, reporter, and producer for NPR. As a co-host of Alt Latino and the Tiny Desk radio show, as well as a curator and producer for Tiny Desk, she's focused on elevating the diversity of sounds and stories that define Latino culture. Her Tiny Desk productions have accumulated over 250 million views and include shows like Catriel y Paco Amoroso and Bad Bunny. She's interviewed artists from Santana to Rosalia that span generations and the globe, and is a trusted voice on one of the most genre-diverse subsets of music in the world. She's a cross-platform host, contributing reporting to NPR news shows, and an expert voice for media outlets like El País, Univision, and the BBC, and the LA Times. One last thing before we get started. Please put questions in the chat as the presentations are going on, and when we get to the appointed time, Elena will call on you and ask you to read your question to the group. Please also feel free to use the chat to chat. And again, we ask the speakers not look at the chat until we get to that portion, as it's a distraction. Okay, and so now I will turn things over to the presenters.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
guys.
much. I'm gonna
Yeah.
go ahead and really quick intro you all if you want. I just want to say quickly, really, really excited to be here talking about this book. It's rare that you know something feels so there's such a clean, perfect intersection of what is happening in the world and culture, and there are people who are actively talking about it in a thoughtful way. So you couldn't have picked a more perfect time to release this book. So very excited. Now I'm gonna let you all present, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Well, we
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for
Yeah.
having us. I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation and we'll kind of walk through some things together. Petra and I will go back and forth a bit. I don't know if
Mhm.
you wanted to add anything, Petra, we're good to
No,
go.
just thanks for coming, and I'm excited to see so many friends in little, even though I can't see you. I'm really appreciative that you're spending your time with us. Um, okay, so Vanessa, do you want to start or you want me to start?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. So this is the cover of the book for those of you who haven't seen it. This is the English version. I should have added the Spanish one as well, but it's out there. So we're going to show some clips that will kind of guide us through our portion of the conversation before Ana Maria jumps back in. So that was a very special moment for us. And maybe Petra, you want to tell them about how the course came to be and then kind of how we moved
Yeah.
toward this moment.
Yeah, so this was in a couple of years ago, and I started teaching a Bad Bunny class at Wellesley in 2022. I started the class because I had a lot of students in my music class who were writing all their papers about Bad Bunny, no matter what we studied, no matter what genre, whatever. It was just like 80, 90% Bad Bunny papers. And I also had a seminar on Puerto Rican history that didn't enroll very much. So I figured I would stick them both together, Bad Money, and create this class. Um, and then Vanessa contacted me because she was creating a class. Um, and so we started to collaborate and sharing resources. And this is where we came up with the idea of the Bad Bunny syllabus, which is a website. I think it's on the next slide that offers a lot of different resources to
Skyrockets.
contextualize Bad
Awesome.
Bunny's work. Um, this is the homepage. We always like to just point out, since there's so many educators here, that we have annotated translated lyrics on our website in case you need to use any for class. So the website and the classes sort of started to take on a life of their own. And we started thinking about the possibility of doing a book, um, and writing a book that would take some of what we were doing in our classes, and kind of put it together, so that we could make this information accessible to everyone, since we were getting a lot of requests for more information. And so that's the genesis of the book and the book idea. Um, Overall, the book is using Bad Bunny's career to look at Puerto Rican history, Puerto Rican politics. We have the chapters here. The other hard thing, as I know many of you experienced too, about writing with somebody who's like constantly doing things, is that it's hard to stop. So we thought we were done, and then we released DTMF, and so then we had to write a whole new chapter, with the conclusion. So it ends with the release of DTMF last January, and it begins in 2016 when he first starts, like, gets his first kind of big break. So that's sort of the trajectory of the book. And what we wanted to do now is just offer a few key moments, a few key songs that we thought helped um, illustrate the kind of different eras of Bad Bunny. Um, and we're purposefully choosing songs that are not from DTMF, since we think that Debí Tirar Más Fotos, there's gotten so much publicity and so many people know about it. But one of the things we show in this book is a lot of the kind of protest and performance that he's doing in that album, he's actually done throughout his career. So we're going to show earlier songs, for our presentation.
Yeah, and
And
I'll
so,
also just add that as Petra mentioned, we had finished the book and then DTMF came out. And in fact, some of the folks that we interviewed were like, we wanted to tell you, but we couldn't. And so it just felt really fitting then. We had titled the book P FKN R, which is a phrase that plays a role in a lot of his music, but then he closes out DTMF, right, with La Mudanza and Yo Soy de P FKN R. And so it really just helped us. It just was like the kind of glue that showed that this continuity was always there. So yeah, so our first track here is in chapter 1, and we should also flag that we have a playlist. We can share it in the chat. We have a playlist that goes along with the book, so it has the songs in the order that we mentioned them, and it's on Apple Music and Spotify as well. So we'll go ahead and play the first track. Right, so that's 2016 Soy Peor, and that is the backdrop song for the first chapter that focuses on Latin trap. So this chapter really gives us the opportunity to talk about basically how Latin trap came to be and how it was really this kind of response to what many experienced as a sort of mainstreaming of reggaeton. And we talk about it as well in the context of the Puerto Rican debt crisis. Petra, can you jump in here? I feel like this is like your little the way that you contextualize the moment of Despacito and
Yeah.
sort of where we were with reggaeton and why Latin trap was the perfect sort of response, the antidote to that moment.
Yeah, so the mid 2010s, and so you've got Despacito released in 2017. Before that, Bailando in 2014. So this kind of pop reggaeton fusion is becoming very popular. And also Colombia is becoming a site for reggaeton, and it's becoming a place that people understand to be more romantic pop style than the kind of like hard styles of earlier. And it's in that context that Latin trap starts to surge in Puerto Rico as a kind of, we interviewed artists who talked about it being like voice of the street and things like that. It's also very sexually explicit music. So it was not getting played on radio. It was sort of like early reggaeton, a bit homegrown, except now there's the internet. And so people like Bad Bunny, he creates songs and he puts them on SoundCloud, and then he finally gets signed by Hear This Music, and he releases his first single, Diles. And one of the things that I think, makes Soy Peor particularly notable in this time period is, well, there's two things. The first is that, Latin trap becomes really, really popular through SoundCloud and things like that, but it's not in streaming services until Jerry Puges and Apple Music, who's a big Latin trap fan, decides to make a trap playlist. And when he makes the trap playlist, Bad Bunny songs keep popping up and are really popular, and then they disappear. And in the book, we talk about how Jerry eventually finds Bad Bunny and starts to put him on the playlist and makes him the sort of like voice of Latin trap. He even DJs a radio show that Apple Music has. And so Soy Peor is interesting because it's a love song or like a breakup song, right? That is very accessible lyrically, but maintains a lot of the musical qualities of Latin trap. And so it becomes like a massive hit. And so in the first chapter, we talk about the rise of Latin trap. We talk about the debt crisis, and then it sort of sets the stage for Bad Bunny to really break out with his first album.
Yeah, and just to add, so the icon we have over here of Trap Kings, that was the name of that Latin trap playlist that Jerry from Apple Music created that featured Bad Bunny's work. And just to emphasize for those of you guys who aren't familiar, 2015, the year before Bad Bunny really breaks out is the year where the Puerto Rican debt crisis like hits the fan. It's the moment where the governor at the time, who we spoke with for the book, says like we cannot pay our debt. And Puerto Rico, unlike a state or even another country, because it's not sovereign, right? Because it has a colonial status, it's a colony, doesn't have access to filing for bankruptcy. So what happens, right, is this is when we get the beginnings of what ends up being promesa, which is that the US consolidates the debt and puts all of the debt under the control of the junta, the fiscal control board. And so, in talking with the artist, yes, Latin trap is, it kind of goes back to more connected to reggaeton in the kind of context of what the lyrics are addressing, but also they spoke to the fact that, right, things were really hard because there were all of these austerity measurements being taken, austerity measures. People were losing their jobs, pensions being cut, all of these different things that really impacted the reality of Puerto Ricans on the island and led to an exodus that only was severely worsened by Hurricane Maria in 2017. So that brings us to the next song we want to show here, which is Estamos Bien, a song that touches on Hurricane Maria. This is Bad Bunny's debut on American television on Jimmy Fallon, 2018. It's been a year since the hurricane, and he goes on his first American television appearance and speaks to the audience in English. So both Pedro and I use this clip. We don't just talk about it in the book. It's something that we've taught many times because it's a really, really, really critical moment, right? We see that it is his first time on American television. This is at a point where he really doesn't speak much English, or it's belabored, and he wants to address the audience in English. And it's not just that he wants to address the audience in English, which, as we know, he's continued to sing in Spanish. He's speaking in really clearly political terms, right? He's calling out Donald Trump. He's talking about the troubles on the island. The song on the surface, right, Estamos bien, we're good. It's kind of like has the sentiment of being lighthearted. But in fact, in the song, he talks about the fact that, they don't have electricity in the house, but we're still okay, right? So it kind of represents the duality, the resilience, right? That things are going to be okay, but also things are really bad. And the visuals in the background speak to that, right? Like it opens with these sort of scenes of devastation, but then goes on to show like imagery of basically sort of like love and happiness in the midst of all of this. And so, making this statement and showing that he's going to use his platform to advocate for Puerto Rico in every moment that he can really starts to give us a sense of what comes after that, right? So he says that Maria hits in 2017, more than 4,000 people died. This is one of the most devastating events in modern Puerto Rican history. And we talk about this moment with other artists as well, right? And that Bad Bunny using his platform in this way really set the kind of tone for what a protest song could look like. So this song we very much consider a protest song, in the same vein as other ones we look at in the book, like El Apagón, like La Mudanza. But earlier on in his career, when he wasn't necessarily seen as forceful of a political figure, you do have to look a little bit closer, but the messaging is there, right? The intent is there. I don't know if you want to add, Petra.
No, we're good. Let's keep going.
So the next slide we have just kind of is some of the imagery from the book, which chapter 2 in the book that talks about Hurricane Maria in this moment. So we have this colonial cartoon that shows Uncle Sam, right, giving handouts to this poor Puerto Rican child, right? And this was a lot of the language that Donald Trump was using, very, very like Uncle Sam type language. Puerto Ricans want handouts of everything. And in protest of the complete abhorrent response to the hurricane, one of the forms of protests, right, and the denial of all of the actual numbers of people who had died, was that people started leaving pairs of shoes out in different places, like the Capitol building. And so Bad Bunny placed his shoes out as part of the protest, and this was something that nobody knew. And then it was only a couple of years ago that he posts this picture where he says, I I put my shoes out there from this concert I had done with Paruco, in solidarity with everything that was happening, and I found them in this image. And so the reason we picked this image also is because it demonstrates not just that he was always participating in protest, even if it wasn't as recognized, but also that he wasn't seeking recognition for that. He was already someone who was known at that time, and that he wasn't saying, oh, I'm out there and I'm doing this, right? He did it because, as he always says, like, he couldn't not like leave his European tour and go back to protests in 2019, because that's just what he felt like he needed to do. So he's participating in these different cultural moments because he's Puerto Rican, not because he says he's trying to make some big political statement or to be a politician. So Estamos Bien is from this first album, Por Siempre. And so we also want to show a short clip from the song Caro that Petra and I both used a lot in our classes, and is a central part of the discussion in our chapter about gender representation.
Okay. So I guess this song, we have a chapter in our book that talks about gender politics. So, a lot of our book focuses a lot on Bad Bunny's advocacy for Puerto Rico and a lot of the issues in Puerto Rico around gentrification and environmental racism and colonialism. But the other kind of space that he's really well known for speaking out is around questions of gender and gender politics. Caro is the music video that all my students were writing papers about, because it was such a important moment, particularly in reggaeton, which is such a hyper masculine genre, to have this music video where he is kind of swapping places with this model, Puerto Rican model named Jasmine Joy, and they're kind of androgynous. You can't tell who's who. He's getting his nails painted. This is right after he's denied service at a nail salon in Spain, which was a big kind of news story. There's the Easter egg vocals from Ricky Martin, and the man and the woman kissing Bad Bunny on the cheek. And then the whole kind of message of the song is, caro means expensive. So it's like, we're all worth it. And in that kind of Easter eggy time with Ricky Martin, he's like, I just want to be who I am. I just want to be happy. Why does it bother you? And so it's in this time period that, Bad Bunny is doing a lot of advocacy, kind of behind the scenes advocacy work, but also talking about things like violence against LGBT people, which in Puerto Rico is very endemic, and also things like gender-based violence and domestic violence, both in his songs and in his music videos and in his activism. And so in our chapter on gender, we take a kind of, we talk basically about three kind of main themes. One is the ways that he represents women in his songs as kind of multi-faceted characters, and not solely as sexual objects, although he does do that too. One about like expressions of queerness, both in his clothing and in how he supports queer artists and things like that. And then a section on gender-based violence. Yeah, so I feel like, Vanessa, we can't do a lot when we don't have time.
We don't have time? Okay.
We have
All
like
right.
2 minutes.
Okay.
So I
Well,
feel like we should wrap up and then talk to Anamaria. Yeah.
okay. Do you want me to do There She Goes, or do you want to
No, I think we
No.
should stop. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, those were the other songs we were going to show, but you can listen to them and enjoy them at a later time. So we'll close with this image from the video for the song La Mudanza, which closes out the album Debí tirar más fotos, right? And as I mentioned, we wrote this before the album came out, and the imagery of the people in the formation of P FKN R, the messaging of No me quiero ir de aquí, I don't want to leave here, which was the name of the residency, which is part of the almost the exact lyrics in El Apagón, really show that, from the very beginning, even if it wasn't as pronounced, even if the discussion about history in the lyrics became more pronounced as he evolved as an artist and as a person, those pieces have been there throughout. And so for us, you know, Debí tirar más fotos was really the kind of confirmation that everything that we had written was on track. So, Petra, anything to add before I close this out and Anamaria jumps back in?
No, I'm good. I feel
All
like if
right.
you want to hear the other songs, you can ask us about them in
Yes.
Q&A. So yeah. All right.
Wonderful.
All
Well,
right.
thank you guys so much. So interesting and expansive, and there's so much to be said about him as an artist. And I think that's really where I want to start is understanding a little bit, you know, you mentioned kind of off the bat, um, this idea that it's like when you're covering something that's so living, so breathing, so constantly evolving, where do you draw that line? And I think, you know, more specifically, obviously, with Bad Bunny as an artist, his art, which is both his music and also everything he does, right? It's not just the music, it's everything, how he shows up in concert, how he shows up in the world, like all of his actions,
Mhm.
you know, really have as much of an impact, I think, often as the actual music does. And so much of that is in conversation with what's happening in Puerto Rico, how people are responding. I think that was something we saw a lot with this last record, especially is like the way that there's been a back and forth with the album and then with the residency and then with the tour. And so how do you kind of fit all of that in to an academic work that you know you have to kind of like finalize that analysis in a way or round it out?
Do
I
you
mean,
want to
I feel
go?
like sure. I mean, I think you know you understand in your field, and you know we overlap in academia and the kind of journalistic work that we all do, which is that there is never a perfect moment to like freeze time and stop and say, okay, like now's the time. Maybe when an artist dies, which we certainly don't want to wait for, right? Um, but you know, I mentioned, right, that we finish the book and the album comes out and we go and Mag, one of its producers, was like, I wanted to tell you guys so bad. We couldn't tell you, but like just you got to finish the book because like if you don't finish the book now, it's just you're gonna have to then like include the next thing and the next thing. And I think that you know, with someone like Bad Bunny, every artist is different. So maybe there might be an artist where you feel like a closing of a chapter, but there's so much continuity in his work, even when we don't know that there's continuity in his work. I mean, you know, we didn't get to talk about Nadia Sabe, but right, Nadia Sabe comes out, he's working on DTMF songs when Nadia Sabe comes out. So I was looking at some of the old Nadia Sabe videos, and we get hints of it, like the videos where it's New Year's Eve, it's Christmas, like these themes are there, and we don't even know that like that the seeds are already planted for all of the next chapters. And he's so meticulous. He's so intentional about everything. He's 10 steps ahead. And so I think that for me, and I think for Petra as well, but she can, you know, speak to this, it just felt like there's not going to be a perfect time, but there's so much to say already. And yes, there's going to be so much more to say, but like I think that's that thing. I mean, we wrote the book in 6 months together. And it was just like we had to get all of this stuff out because it was almost like overwhelming to just have all these ideas here and to not have it written down because it feels so massively consequential. And so maybe that's where you stop, where it's like, okay, it's so much that like I can't live my life if I don't get this stuff documented. It's gonna be a problem.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, like you mentioned, Vanessa, there is a lot of continuity in his work. And so when DTMF came out, it actually really was not hard to integrate it into the book because what he was doing in that album was so obviously in line with our argument about the ways that he kind of uses his art to advocate for these different things. And so there's an epilogue about DTMF, but it didn't like transform the narrative of the book at all. And I think that's because Bad Bunny's only been around for about 10 years, but he's left up this massive body of work, and he certainly grows and shifts as an artist. But I think the kind of core remains very consistent, and that also I think makes it a little bit easier to write about him. But also there was a sense of like we need to publish this before his next project comes out, or we'll never be done.
It's interesting that you both touch on that continuity, but also a bit of kind of like the distinctness of each era. That's something that I've heard. I have a friend who's an artist in Puerto Rico who knows him pretty well, and he's a master at adopting. Like every single album has been a new character with a new mission and a new purpose. Does that resonate with you all? And do you feel like that is true? And also like there are things that are always there. What is the adopted persona of Benito in some of this, and what is like the Benito that is consistent?
Well, I would say so. I agree with that. I think that each album has its own, like Vanessa was saying, one we didn't interview him for this book, but we interviewed a lot of people who work with him. And um, he seems to have his hands in like every little detail of every little thing. And as you said, Anna Maria, not just the music, but like the whole package. And so there are definitely each album has its own theme, its own little mascot, its own little and sonically is different, right? Like Un Verano Sin Ti is different from El Último Tour del Mundo, which is different from Nadie Sabe, which is different from Debí Tirar Más Fotos. I feel like his first two albums are the two that are the most alike. Um, but that said, again, I think what's the consistent part is the kind of messaging and commitments are the same, right? And it's just sort of different styles and different approaches to articulating these different messages is how I understand it. Maybe this is a good time to like, I'll talk about like one of the songs we didn't mention, we didn't have time to go through is Where She Goes, which is from Nadie Sabe Lo Que Va a Pasar Mañana, which was this album that came out in 2023 that was like his like harkening back to his trap days for his real fans. But this is also the time that he's dating Kendall Jenner. It's also a time when he's living in Los Angeles. And so there's all of this like buzz about like, is he really still connected to the people? Does he still care about Puerto Rico? There's all this gossip everywhere about Kendall Jenner. And so, we read so many articles about Bad Bunny. And so there's this like cluster of articles when this single Where She Goes comes out, and they filmed the music video in the desert in California because that's where they are. This was also Coachella times. And there's horses. And so there's all these think pieces about how the horses are because Kendall Jenner is his girlfriend and she likes to ride horses. We found them in multiple news outlets. But the horse comes from Vuelve Candy B, which is a song on the album, which references the most decorated racehorse to come out of Puerto Rico and has nothing to do with Kendall Jenner, right? According to the producers of the album. So it's just one of the things that's so interesting to me, or was so interesting doing this research, is hearing from my students, from my family, from my friends, from random people, what they think is happening, and then talking to the people who are like participating in making this stuff and what conversations they were having. And they're often really different. And so like at least in the Nadia Sabe times, that was true. So I think that's an example of how like his kind of core remains consistent, even if artistically he's doing different things.
And I would just add that, I think like my students, like for our Bad Bunny syllabus social media, we have like a team of students who do that. And they did like a post where it was like Bad Bunny's eras through his albums, right? And they think about it. I think young people, especially like definitely, stylistically, like aesthetically, there's all these things that we do notice that shift with the album, right? And he does embody it, right? Like the kind of cowboy theme was there, right? Even if it was about Puerto Rico. Um, but I also think it's so important to understand that it's the errors, it's the theme of the album, it's all of these things, but it's also that he's evolving as a person because we're seeing this person grow up, right? He's going from like his, late teens, early 20s into his 30s, and a lot happens in that time frame. That's, in the same way we see like he's learning a lot more. He's kind of articulating in his lyrics about Puerto Rican history in different ways, and so I think that contributes to that feeling of the evolution or the eras, is that like he's also growing as a person. And so naturally the themes that are there, they become more pronounced because he is kind of refining what he really wants to focus on every time.
Well, and I think, when talking about the way that people perceive some of these things is also relevant, right? Like when he's trying to communicate a certain concept or a message or whatever it is, like the way if people are reading that as Kendall Jenner X, Y, and Z, like that also matters. But I would say for him, especially with this last album, I feel like he's actually really pretty successful for how big of an artist he is at controlling a lot of his narrative and like you said, kind of refining his messaging. So what do you think about him and how he communicates things and what he's done has allowed him to kind of maintain that control?
Mhm. That's a really good question.
I mean, one of the things we talk a lot about in the book is, um, the other thing, and a lot of this material also comes from a lot of journalists who have like interviewed him over several years and stuff, is like as a person, he seems pretty consistent too, right? And is perceived as very genuine and authentic. Um, and I think that helps. Um, I think that helps make people amenable to hear what he has to say. That it makes it seem like it's coming from a place of actual like thought. Do you know what I mean? It feels a little bit less manufactured, I think, to a lot of people. And so I think that's one thing. I think another thing is that he's one of the things that is also very consistent is the team of people that he works with. So he's been the group of people that surrounds him are people that he's known his whole adult life. And um, everything he does seems to be like a group project, but it's like the same very small group that is always working together with some outsiders coming in and out. But so I think that there's a lot of um, I think the fact that he's on an independent record label that has been with him for his more or less his whole career and given him a lot of latitude and flexibility and resources to do different things also helps. So he does seem to have a lot of control, and um, I think he's got like I don't know, that seems to be three things to me that make it seem like he has um, really a lot of control and a lot of say in what projects he pursues and how he pursues them and how he says them. Um, and one of the things we talk about in the book too, that I think several people, many art, like some of the artists we talk to mention this is, you know, there's a perception sometimes that like as people get more integrated into the mainstream music industry, they become less sort of involved in things, or less likely to speak up. And he seems to do the opposite. And in fact, the more he involves himself in different things, the more he seems to become popular, right? And so we make the argument that that has to do some with the kind of perception of authenticity that a lot of the audience sees in him. I don't know, Vanessa, if you have something to add.
I mean, the thing, it's a little bit of not exactly in line. I don't think it's a direct response to the question, but what you were saying just made me think about, okay, maybe it's not directly like sort of how he gets to maintain control, but it kind of is more about that evolution, which is something that I know Petra experienced firsthand when she did the event with him at Harvard, and I think we see it in a lot of different spaces, which is that he's very amenable to kind of like dealing with errors he makes and like refining things and being like, okay, well, yeah, I got that wrong, and so here's how I'm addressing it, like self-reflective. And so I do think that contributes. It contributes to the evolution of it as an artist, but I also think it contributes to like the control because he's willing to say like, okay, I need to understand this better. Even Puerto Rican history, right? Like he knows way more about Puerto Rican history now than he did in 2016. We all know that. That's very clear to us, and he lets us know that all the time. Um, and that other part, just in terms of sort of the sort of like appeal about him, I think comes from it's like it makes that he admits when he needs to kind of like refine something, but also, right, like the whole persona of like, yo hago lo que me da la gana, right? I do whatever I want. I don't care what other people think. But what we also get time and time again through his interviews, through his work, is that actually he cares a lot. And then there's this part of him that like really doesn't like, right? He's sort of fearless in presentation of self in these different ways, but also he really cares a lot. And so I think it's more like these kind of layers of him as an artist that we see become more pronounced. Um, I don't know. These are just, it's not all like in response to the question. It was just what Petra was saying and your question made me kind of think about all of these different components.
Well, I think partially some of what you're hitting on that I think about with him a lot is he's very precisely casual. Or maybe it's casually precise. Like
Mhm.
his whole persona, right, is to present as very unpracticed and very kind of like, exactly, yo hago lo que me da gana. O sea, whatever, I'm just doing it. And it's never that. Like he's clearly extremely planned and extremely intentional. And so I think to your point about him being willing to apologize, it's interesting because even that sometimes I wonder if there's a precision in that
Mm,
in some
hmm.
ways.
For
Yeah.
Um,
sure.
yeah. What do you think makes him so successful? And I don't mean just record breaking. I mean, there's that, but to be an artist with such a clear vision and a message that could be perceived as controversial, I mean, that's not very normal for an artist of this magnitude to be as revolutionary, you could
Hmm.
argue, rebellious at the very least. I mean, what allows him to be that?
I think there's so many factors, and I think we could talk about this like forever. I'll drop a few, and I know Petra has many as well. Um, you know, we we obviously have many examples of artists who have gone who are inherently very vocally political and who have not been able to um you know get get the kind of global messaging that he has, right? There's lots of potential examples, but one that we talk about a lot is Calle 13. Right, Calle 13, super political, super revolutionary. They're banned from performing in Puerto Rico for 4 years, right? And in fact, Residente becomes this like really important mentor for Bad Bunny. Um, so it's not just the inspirations that he constantly credits, like Tego Calderon, who is also super outspoken. It's people like Calle 13. Um, and I think that we what we see is that he really gets to learn from these examples of the kind of limits and how we play with it. I think it's very intentional talking about this topic of precision, right? It's like he's being political, but like in the beginnings, it's like more sprinkled in. Right? It's not as forceful. And even when it's forceful, like thinking about his speech at the Festival de la Esperanza last year. That was 2024 for the independence candidate, the candidate for governor, and the Alianza, which is like the alliance of these different parties that advocate for independence in Puerto Rico. He says time and time again, like, I'm not advocating for a particular party. I'm not right. Like, it's very much like, I'm not saying it's about me being an independentista. I'm saying it's about me caring about the future of Puerto Rico. And I think that for young people in Puerto Rico and on a global level, that the disillusionment with political parties of all kinds is very real. That it doesn't feel like a real thing to do to align yourself with a political party. It's like, what do we want for our future? And so I think when we think about him as like this kind of voice of Puerto Rican youth, but even global youth, it has to do with these different components. Like, a lot of youth do not ascribe to conforming gender representations or identities. A lot of youth do not ascribe to like identifying with a political party, right? So I think that ability to say, this isn't about a political party, this isn't about being a revolutionary, this is about me wanting the best for my homeland, changes up the possibility. And yet he gets more and more clear about the messaging, but he never says, yo soy independentista. You right? Like, he's not like saying that. So, Petra, I don't know if you want to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say another thing that I think is important about him as an artist is, one of the criticisms of reggaeton and of Latin trap is that they're very monotonous and boring, and that they just repeat the same sounds and the same things over and over again. And I think one of the things that Bad Bunny has done very well is a lot of genre blending, a lot of fusions. Even if he often works with the same groups of people, they integrate a lot of different things. That's part of what makes each album different, right? Like El Último Tour del Mundo is like a little bit more rock, right? Un Verano Sin Ti is like a little bit more Caribbean. Debí tirar más fotos is more like salsa plena bomba, right? So I think there's also that he is musically really interesting, and keeps people on their toes, right? Like, one of the questions we get a lot is what's going to happen at the Super Bowl. And I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't feel comfortable making any sort of pronouncement about what's going to happen at the Super Bowl, because every time he does something, it's like completely different from the last time he did something. So I don't know who's going to happen at the Super Bowl. But like, I think that there's also that part of it. So like, in the book, and I think this is partially like because the book also comes out of our classes, and in our classes we're using Bad Bunny as a hook to get to these like bigger issues around Puerto Rican history. There's a lot of emphasis on his politics, and I think that's really important. But I also just think that musically he's really good, right? And I think we see this too, even like major haters of reggaeton love Bad Bunny, right? And we were at a conference a couple of years ago at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and they had a panel with like a jazz musician and a classical musician and a woman who makes movie scores, like composers in different genres, all sort of breaking down the compositions of these songs, and all relating to them and talking about how musically they were so complex and interesting. So I think that's also a big part of it too, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think we have to move to Q&A now. Thank you guys so much. It's such an interesting discussion. And the first question is from Jose. Do you want to ask it?
Yes, yes, thank you. Let me turn on my camera, since with my students, I always want them to turn on their camera when they speak. Well, hello, everybody. Saludos a todos.
Jose.
So I asked just the basic question as a newer fan to Latin trap and reggaeton. Of course, I've heard that phrase associated with Bad Bunny and the concerts, and I hear it everywhere. But I was curious about its origins. I wasn't sure if Bad Bunny came up with that, or it's something that was kind of endemic to Puerto Rico, and he kind of just like took it to this next level.
The word P FKN R. The
Yes.
phrase P FKN R.
Yeah, I mean, my Petra, you can tell me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that that perhaps it was used before, but certainly in the way that it is written and the way that it has become like an expression in music. His song P FKN R, written the way it's written in our book title, is on his 2020 album. And that Yo hago lo que me da la gana. And I mean, that's the first time I am having this experience with it. And then it just starts to appear in a lot of his songs, right? And it's in El Apagón. We hear it in Debí tirar más fotos. It comes up a lot. Um, and so I think that it's not unlike other terms that we hear about Puerto Rico, like Puerto Rico está bien cabrón, right? It means it's really good. It means it's really fucked up. And P fucking R is like the same kind of vibe. It's like it's complex and this like kind of duality. But yeah, my understanding in terms of like my familiarity with it is that it comes from originally in terms of popularizing it, his song from 2020.
Fantastic. Can I just mention too that I just got the book like 2 days ago, and
Uh,
it's wonderful.
Thank
It's
you.
amazing, and I do see that you all address it on page 6. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks. Maria, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for this conversation. I can't wait to get my book. And I think you answered this a little bit, but I kind of want to get more specific. When we talk about Bad Bunny, at least from the sort of music media press angle, I guess, especially the speaking, the sort of Anglophonic world, Un Verano Sin Ti was this massive moment. Debí tirar más fotos is this massive moment. It seems like Nari Sabe was criticized for being a little bit too preoccupied with
Mhm.
Bunny being too preoccupied with his own fame. We brought up Kendall Jenner, and unfortunately, I think you sort of have to in this space. And now, after this conversation, I'm like, I need to go back and listen to that album because I'm wondering what was missed. I'm wondering in doing this book, and again, I can't wait to read it. I'm sure it's in there. I wonder, was there some sort of connections with that album in particular and Puerto Rico's colonial history that was sort of missed in that time when that album came out? Or if not that specifically, some other sort of larger political conversation? As you were speaking, I was thinking maybe there was more to his performance of masculinity at that time, the sort of most wanted thing, coming out on a horse. That seems like that might mean something more than I don't know, just a sort of vaquero spirit or something. I'm wondering if there's something with that album in particular that, we should reconsider perhaps.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely, um, doing the research made me appreciate that album a lot more since it's definitely not my favorite one, either. The horse, like I said, is like the reference to this Puerto Rican racehorse, P FKN R. The most like there are many references in that album that have to do with local things happening in Puerto Rico that I think a lot of people miss, right? Um, so, for instance, there's a line in the song Vaticano, which is like basically like song with against the like age-old criticism of reggaeton as being and trap as being like all about sex and all of these, the like morality police, right? And he has a line in there about kissing Toquicha and kissing Piano Antiano. And so Piano Antiano is a Puerto Rican trans artist who Bad Bunny has supported quite a bit, and Toquicha is a Dominican bisexual artists, and the two of them kissed in a nightclub, and it caused a huge amount of backlash in Puerto Rico, and it was like a major news story. And that's what he's referencing there. But I like none of my students know that, right? I mean, you have to have followed the gossip in Puerto Rico at that time to follow that controversy. So I think there's a lot of things in that album like that. Um, that people miss. Another one that I like to talk about, there's a song on that album called Seda, which is just like a very, very sexually explicit song. And I don't think Seda lyrically has any sort of deep meaning about anything. But in the music video, they're at a birthday party. And this is goes back to Vanessa's point, how even with that album, he's dropping hints of what's happening next. So the music video is him and Bryant Myers surrounded by women at a birthday party. And they're just there drinking champagne and eating cake. That is literally all they're doing. However, in the very beginning, he is walking around with champagne and a book, which is The History of Puerto Rico by Fernando Picot, which is like one of the most famous Puerto Rican history books at this birthday party. And then he puts the book down and drinks his champagne and like hangs out with the girls. So like there's all of these little moments in there that I think I definitely didn't get. And then when we did our interviews, particularly with his producers, Tiny, and in this case Mag, because Mag did most of Nadia Sawe, I was like, oh, and then I started to appreciate it more. So that said, I also think a lot of that album is about him kind of grappling with these kind of discomfort with his status and this relocation to Los Angeles and all the backlash that he's getting for that, right? Yeah.
I just want to add the Most Wanted, that tour, that was all inspired by like the Fania, like Willie
Oh yeah.
Colon and Hector Lavoe. So that was actually a direct reference, again, hinting at I'm gonna be getting into salsa. Like we knew it was a reference, but we didn't know because we have this trap album. We didn't know he was gonna be doing salsa, but that was a hint. Like and then Willie Colon is in the video for Nueva York and he mentions him in the song, right? So he is dropping hints even in the tour. We were at the listening party for Nadia Sabe, and the opening of our book, we have a quote on the opening. That quote is actually from the booklet they handed out to everyone when you walked into the Nadia Sabe listening party. And it was a little booklet of him in the making of this. And all of it was like the literal, like they talk about Un Verano Sin Ti or Debí Tirar Más Fotos as a love letter to Puerto Rico, but he actually handed out this booklet with a love letter to Puerto Rico in it. And part of what he said was, soy grande porque vengo de un lugar pequeño, soy leyenda porque soy puertorriqueño, aquí nací y aquí me muero. I'm big because I came from a small place. I'm a legend because I'm Puerto Rican. I was born here and I will die here. This is what he's handing out as you walk in to see it. So it's always there. It's just, it doesn't look the same every time. And I think that's also what keeps him interesting. Every single time, like we really don't know what we're going to get. And I think that is what keeps this kind of snowball effect of, yeah, maybe everyone's not going to love it, but more people are going to be drawn to it. More people are going to be exposed to him, and more people are going to find a little something that they feel like is for them in his music.
Thank you very much. That's way more interesting than just he's hanging out in Monaco or whatever. So I appreciate it.
But that song is a banger, though. That
It
song is
is
a
also hanging out in
banger.
Monaco.
Cool. Eric, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. My question is about Bad Bunny's popularity outside of Spanish speaking audiences at the sort of generic global pop level of a Michael Jackson one paradigm, Taylor Swift another paradigm. Are we seeing that level of popularity? If we are, how does the work translate in those settings? Or is it more like a Garth Brooks thing where there's massive popularity within certain defined categories, but less so outside of those?
Yeah. I mean, this is the question. I keep trying to figure this out. I am, so on the one hand, I think I don't know if this is sort of where, partially where you're going with the question. I get a lot of questions about Spanish language music, like this is going to be the time. And it is, I think, one of the things that makes Bad Bunny different from, in the past we had songs like Despacito or La Bamba become number one, and they were one song, and then, Despacito did not usher in a whole bunch of Spanish on the, Hot 100 necessarily. So I'm really interested to see if Bad Bunny's global popularity leads to other Spanish language artists, moving, becoming more sort of mainstream in the US, right? Or if it's just a Bad Bunny situation. That's a question that I have. And I think it relates to your question about, um, who's listening, and I I don't really know. I mean, I think that I think this is also the issue of Latin music, right? Like there are many, many Latin artists who have explicitly said, like, we are not interested in singing in English. Like I'm thinking about Romeo Santos, a bachata singer who is from New York and speaks fluent English. And he's like, I'm not going to ever sing in English. You all have to come to me. And he, is the first person to collaborate with Drake, and he collaborates with Usher, like when Bad Bunny is like 10 years old. And so um, I just wonder, like Latin music is a global phenomenon, and they don't really need to cross over into the US mainstream to like be successful.
I was not really
Um,
asking about the United States. I was more interested in
uh,
like Indonesia. I'm interested in
yeah,
like the global. The global is
Yeah.
neither the United States nor only it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
literally
yeah,
yeah, so
yeah.
that was really where my question was going. Like are we getting like statues of Bad Bunny going up the river a la Michael Jackson circa history in Eastern Europe or something? That I just have never looked at the numbers. What are the numbers
Yeah.
telling us about audience in this country versus that country? Has there been touring in places like the
Yeah.
Philippines or like what
Yeah.
just like from that perspective, what's been the extent of Bad Bunny's particular global popularity?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
I
good
mean,
question.
I think there's a lot of things we could add to that. I mean, just to address that last component of the tour. And Ana Maria, I feel like you should add in here. I have something that like will be a natural way for you to weigh in on this, which is, thinking about the tour. Like, yes, he has like a Japan date, he has an Australia date, he's performing in Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
Like it's
Poland.
Poland. I mean, this like selling out stadiums in Poland, it's kind of wild, right? Um, but I think there's a few things. I mean, we talked about like how there's the core of like sort of Bad Bunny and then like how he's evolved. I mean, one of the things that's always key in what he's talking about, and I think we get really, really, really deeply in DTMF is, and by that I mean the album, not the song. I'll specify because I want to mention the song, is like homeland, right?
Mm.
Like we are in massive global crises. People are being ripped from their homelands. We're in the middle of multiple genocides and forced migrations on a global level, and so this like deep connection to like this is a person who puts his homeland first.
Mm.
He talks about it all the time. You know it whether you understand the language or not. You feel it whether you understand the language or not. It's very universal. It's as universal as love, because the love for a homeland is also universal. And also that feeling of like, and my homeland is being taken from me, and what can I do? And so I think lots of people are looking for different forms of resistance to that, and music is one of those really critically important forms. That anytime there's a movement, that you have a soundtrack for that. And so I think, and this brings me to DTMF the song, which is that song, right? That song trended, that became number one globally, right? And multiple songs from this album became number one globally, but DTMF became number one globally. And what we saw was that trend. And I remember Mag talking about how like impactful seeing people all over the world showing their slideshows, not
Mm.
just of their loved ones, but like even Bad Bunny in the issue, he did that series where he was on the cover of Billboard in every single country that has a Billboard magazine. It was an incredible series. And he talked about it in the interview that like seeing those slideshows of, people all over the world you know, from Palestine to Eastern Europe, like all these different places in turmoil and experiencing the absolute worst, are using this song and connecting to this song and showing that the feeling there, even if it's a bomba song, that the feeling there, or sorry, a plena song, that the feeling there is universal. And I also think that, as Petra spoke about, his expansiveness in genre, that like rather than having, he doesn't just have like a core fan base that's into his Latin trap. He has a fan base that is just snowballed because he's constantly, let me bring in some rock, let me bring in some bachata, let me bring in some salsa. It's just snowballing. And so the core fan base is constantly growing because his musicality is constantly expanding. And that question of the door opening, I think that's not just a question that we're thinking, everyone's thinking it. Anamaria, you're on the pulse of it. I interviewed, and this made me think of you, Anamaria. I interviewed Chuy for this piece on the like larger impact of the residency in Puerto Rico. And Chuy is going to be, dropping an album, and they're like, we're really curious to see if like Bad Bunny really opened this door. And, they had a tiny desk that was huge for them, right? So like, I don't know in terms of like from your perspective, Ana Maria, but I feel like it already has opened doors for young Miko, for Chuy, for a lot of folks. But I don't know how far that'll go.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, when I think about Bad Bunny's power, it is Puerto Rico. There is something deeply, like, incontrovertibly infectious about the pride that the attachment that Puerto Ricans feel for home. I think that is something that he, as an artist, was able to really successfully harness, but that energy did not begin with him. Um, I have a friend who is a Chilean rapper. Her name's Ana Tishu, and she said this to me literally a week ago. She was like, revolution that comes from nationalism is not very strong, but revolution that comes from raíces, from roots, like that's really, really strong. And I think that, I mean, there's a lot of things that makes Puerto Rico unique, but I think one of those things is actually a detachment from really any nation state. Like, yes, they are part of the United States technically. Yes, they often refer to themselves as a nation, but really that there's an element of a floatingness that I think makes them dig down into raíces, into roots, and I think that is that's very easy to attach to. Whether you're part of the rest of a Latin American race, identifying and sharing those races, or really like a global race, honestly. Like it sounds kind of whatever, but I think that's a huge part of it's really just that he's been able to successfully communicate what is a very Puerto Rican thing in his art, and that's easy to attach to.
Thanks.
That was
Cool.
beautiful. That was
I thought
amazing.
about him a lot too, also. And I spent a lot of time there, and with artists like Chewy, and I honestly booked that before they were on the album.
Amazing.
Yeah, because they were doing beautiful things, I thought, before
Right.
they got attached to him.
Yeah. And I'm not supposed to read the chat, but Carl Wilson is saying that he was #1 in global streaming and bigger than Taylor and Drake, which I did not know. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely not just the Spanish speaking audience that is carrying him. Like I think he proves that like we had a lull between when he was #1 2020 to 22, and then again in 2025. But I mean, like give that seems still pretty incredible, right? Like he didn't have it every single year, but I think that he has like a staying power that is really outstanding.
Cool.
I mean, and this is like also why he's going to headline the Super Bowl, right? I mean, I haven't talked to anyone in the NFL, but they're trying to globalize their audience, and there's literally no one else you can have if you want to attract the biggest global audience possible than Bad Bunny,
Okay, cool. So I want to ask a question for Carl, who cannot speak at the moment. So he's asking, when you talk about him adjusting and repenting for things, does that apply to the more typical sexist sounding stuff from his early, more trap reggaeton recordings? And how much has he adjusted the way he addresses sex itself, along with the gender stuff you've talked about?
So yes, when I talked to him in 2019. So that was after his first album, but before his second album came out, right before the pandemic. And he was so young. And one of the things that really struck me in our conversation was he talked about how he, he talked about this issue that he realized, he heard criticisms about people talking about the way he spoke about women in songs, and he heard them, and it got him reflecting on machismo and all these other kind of lessons that he had growing up. So I think, yes, that includes that. Now, the question is like, how has he shifted his lyrics? I think, I don't know. I mean, Vanessa, I'd be interested to hear what you think. I think that it's not inherently problematic to sing songs about sex, and he continues to do that, and that tends to still be his sort of number one theme. Like if you're taking his songs really literally. I also think that reggaeton has received one of the best Bad Bunny articles that has been published in academia in the past couple of years is one in that book called The Bad Bunny Effect, by Noel, Garcia. I forget his first last name, begins with an A, should know. But what he does is he traces these themes that Bad Bunny gets criticized for around representations of sex, and looks at 100 years of Puerto Rican music and how it's been consistent throughout. And I say this not to kind of give him an out or a pass, but I do feel that a lot of the criticism towards reggaeton becomes a little bit, this comes from like my first book, but I feel like there's a lot of attention on reggaeton because of the people who sing it, when there are a lot of people in other genres that are considered more respectable or more kind of nationally appropriate that have just as problematic lyrics. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
I mean, I guess I would also add that, in my class, when we do the sections on gender, which could be like endless. And we look at a lot of different music, but we specifically look at some of Bad Bunny's different songs, right? So we look at a song like Solo de Mi and watch the video for that. And then La Difícil, so Solo de Mi is from his first album, La Difícil is from his second album. And then we listen to Andrea from Un Verano Sin Ti. And my students, it's like very, very, very obvious from the lyrics and the translations, not even thinking about the visuals, that the evolution of the way that he talks about gender in these different moments is actually very clear. Like the lyrics for Andrea are nuanced and like complex in a way that, even though Sola de Mi I think is a really important song, um I don't think it is sort of like it hasn't had the like longevity in terms of like even resonating with my students. Like my students will have critique, they'll like it, but they have critiques of Solo de Mi or La Difícil, where like Andrea, they're just like, oh whoa, this is like just so nuanced in the way that it's talking about gender and power and violence and sex and sexuality and desire. So I think that there has been a really big difference. Now, of course, like when I listen to Nadia Sabe, yeah, there's super explicit lyrics, but I mean, I think I agree with Petra. Like, also, we're not gonna like, even if we like Bad Bunny, we're not gonna like every single thing that he says, or have it be like our favorite lyric. But I think so much of his discussion about sex in actually explicit terms, not all the time, but like a song like Vaticano, which she mentioned, it's super explicit, like very explicit, and also like actually really purposeful in its explicitness. It's not just critiquing reggaeton, it's called Vaticano, it's critiquing the whole institution of religion and the hypocrisy around needing to be prude or pretending that you're prude, and just kind of like embracing that like sex and sexuality are real things, and being able to be honest and explicit about that, is less hypocritical, right? So I think I actually really appreciate, I think it can get really dicey in the classroom. Like I have had students who have been I have had students who have been like horrified by his lyrics and have said so. They're like, and Carl, I'm seeing your message that yeah, get it. But yeah, I've had students who've been like, if I had a child, I would never let them listen to this music. And I'm like, I just think it's, that reaction. I still get that even from my students, but I also think it bridges really important conversations.
Well, and I think even though Andrea is a more complicated song, though, I think that kind of nuanced approach has always been there, though.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, I think that there's always been, and one of the things that's been very interesting about his lyrics over time is also in the moments when he has these very sexually explicit lyrics, there's also a lot of conversation about consent and about like the woman's desire. And so,
And pleasure.
sometimes, right. So sometimes people will interpret that as sort of like articulating like a man's fantasy of a woman who really wants to do all of these things. And sometimes people interpret it as a more sort of progressive um, explanation or a recognition of women's sexuality. So like there's different ways of interpreting it, but I do think that that's, you know, part of it. And I think that's also part of this genre is sort of the shock factor is part of it too, and always has been.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And unless there are more questions, I will just thank the presenters and thank you everybody for coming. And I remind you guys that next time on the 21st, we're having David Shumway talking about Leonard Cohen. And I would like to ask the presenters to stay for a while as everybody leaves.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thank you so
Connie.
much. This is like our first thing, so thank you.